Welcome to the Worthy Initiative podcast, where healing meets truth and hope takes root. I'm Jim Plasky, a family nurse practitioner, trauma survivor, and the founder of the Worthy Initiative.
And I'm Brittany Brandt, a lifelong learner, trauma survivor, and co-host. Together, we explore what it really means to reclaim your worth through real stories, honest conversations, and the kind of insight that only comes from walking through the fire yourself.
Here we talk about the climb, the messy, powerful process of healing and rediscovering who you are underneath the survival.
Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe that you are more than what broke you.
This podcast is not meant to replace medical advice or professional counseling. It's a conversation rooted in lived experience, clinical understanding, and the shared belief that healing happens when we stop hiding our pain.
Because you are not what hurt you, and your story isn't over. Welcome back. I am Brittany Brandt.
And I'm Jim Plasky.
And this is the Worthy Initiative podcast. And today we want to touch on something a little bit more sensitive, a little heavier. We are going to be talking about grief around the holidays. And, you know, grief can be a wide topic, but I think for the sake of today's episode, we are going to specifically focus in on grief around relationships, loss, whether that is physical loss or a change in a relationship dynamic.
Yeah, and especially, you know, embarking into this holiday season. Here we're recording this episode before Thanksgiving, and the up and coming holidays embed themselves around traditions, and maybe that tradition is going to look a little different this year. So we wanted to have a platform where we can discuss what we've done in these situations, acknowledging the hardship that the holidays may bring. We often associate the holidays with smiles and festivities, but how do you wear that mask when you're struggling on the inside? And I know we have both been in situations like that. Would you say, for the listener that's going through it now, what has been your biggest growth, or what has helped you grow?
Sure. I think for me, probably one of the most notable experiences when it comes to loss was when I lost my dad when I was 16. And while, you know, my dad didn't necessarily live here, so I wasn't attending functions with him on a regular basis for the holidays, knowing that his presence was not on the planet anymore was still very heavy to carry into the holiday season. And for a lot of that time when I was young, I just really kind of numbed that out. I didn't think about it. And when I would think about it, the grief would become so overwhelming that it just kind of plagued that entire time of the year. And it still does at times. You know, we talk about grief. It's not linear, right? It's cyclical, and it comes and it goes. And for me, the loss of my dad, you know, I lost him in February of 2005. And every year, the holidays start to come, and I feel the weight of that grief come back a little bit. Just knowing my dad's not here to see me or my children or, you know, experience these things with us as a family anymore. And there's almost an anticipation that happens when certain events are coming up. And so I know through my experiences over the years that there is going to be this heaviness that comes around that time of the year for me.
So you're more aware that it's going to be difficult.
And then just taking into consideration that it is okay to feel whatever you feel in your grief. That sometimes I cry, you know, thinking about it. And that's a good thing to let that out. Sometimes it passes a lot easier. You know, there's times that I have journaled through some of those feelings, and you know, there's all different types of things that we can choose to do to actively participate in the process of grief, but that's a choice.
Right. And, for me, growing up where, yes, we struggled as kids, but our grandparents tried to really refocus that when we were in their presence. They became the center of most of our traditions. So when I lost both of my grandparents, especially my grandmother, we talked about this in a previous episode, and how I dedicated that Christmas holiday to her luncheon for the funeral. And then I kind of pulled away from those Christmas holidays because it now had that, even though I didn't intend for it to be a negative, it had those negative associations, the heaviness of it. That's changed, and I'm able to grasp it again, and acknowledging that I want to be that magical moment for my children. So like passing that legacy on, but even from a different facet. And I appreciate you talking about the loss of your father. I think most of us relate, there's that one seat at the table that if we could take it back, do something different, that we would love to see that individual there, because we always leave something unsaid or something undone. And I think that weight plays into it. But adding another layer into it, relationship changes. So the relationship after the loss of a loved one and how the rest of the family dynamics play into it.
Right.
But we've both been through divorce. My ex-wife and I were together for a long time, and we had many family traditions that were embedded. I mean, we were dating in high school, so a lot of our traditions were embedded. And that first few years, even though there was a lot of hurt that happened that led to it, it still was very raw. And I had to go through that grieving process of the tradition looks different. I remember the first Christmas Eve not having my kids there with me and being completely alone. That was devastating, because now not only did I not have my grandparents, that factor there, but now I didn't even have my children with me.
Right.
And then you regret it. You're like, oh, maybe I made the wrong choice. Maybe I shouldn't have chose me. I should have chose them. It gets better. I mean, time goes on, but when you're in that situation, and those listeners that are going through that right now, we acknowledge that that is hard. That is difficult. The loss of a loved one, the loss of a relationship. But it does get better. Both of us have been through that fire multiple times, as most of us will as humans. We go through grief, but it's how we cope with it and how we overcome that process. Grief has a function. We're acknowledging a loss, and we're acknowledging that change needs to occur.
Yeah, I've always loved the quote, and I don't know where it came from, but it's like, grief is all the love you wanted to give somebody that you no longer can. And so, as you're talking about loss of relationships as well, the holidays are always a really difficult time for that, especially when you have separated families. And, us both having gone through divorces, it gets complex on an emotional level when you're going to different houses, and your kids are going to different houses or to multiple different families, and you aren't involved in that anymore, and the whole picture looks different than what it did. And it is hard to deal with that at first, I think. And for some, it might be hard for a really long time. I, have 3 girls. They're, 18, almost 14, and 6. And the relationship dynamics with myself and their fathers are all different. And so the grief that came at certain points following those different breakups, and my youngest daughter is my ex-husband's. And so adding that level of a marriage and a divorce onto that is a whole different thing to process. And when you're, processing divorce in general, and then you add in the holidays to that, it's
hard.
Makes it bigger.
Yeah, it's hard. And, having multiple facets, even as a child, seeing loss and dealing, with parents who never truly healed themselves and then now trying to heal them, we get in these loops that I had to take a step back and realize it's not just me
Right.
going through this loss. So how do I arrange it that we can honor this individual, honor
Yeah.
this relationship? When it comes to Christmas traditions, my grandmother was always in the kitchen baking something, and I took a lot of her traits from her. I mean, growing up with her, I spent a lot of time in the kitchen. So there are certain cookies and lefse that's tradition, and I will be doing them this year. And
Yeah.
during it, I am saying all of the cuss words that she would have been saying as she's frustrating steering that bowl. No, but it's just keeping that spirit alive. But
Yeah.
even when it comes to the relationship change, I
Mhm.
know that if it's difficult for me,
Mm-hmm.
it's difficult for my kids.
Absolutely.
And I don't, despite all the negative feelings I have for an individual, I won't play that into my children.
Right.
They didn't get to choose their parents. They would love to see their parents together. That's not feasible, nor will that ever happen. But I still acknowledge her, and they will want to make things to take to
Mhm.
her or get something to take to her, and
Of
I
course.
support that. I mean,
And I as well. I
it's
do the
their
same
mother,
thing.
and
Yep.
so
Yep.
I want to make that known too, that we're trying to create these traditions, but my traditions that I grew up are going to look a little bit different to my kids because now
Yeah.
they have a separated journey, and that's okay. That pathway, there isn't a right or wrong, but we need to acknowledge its existence so we're not hiding it away.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it can be very, very difficult to carry some of this into a gathering of a large amount of people
sure.
that, whether it's a collective loss, right? Like a grandparent, where that absence is felt by the whole of the family, or, a more personal loss, like a divorce, where it's more closely honed in to a couple people or one person. Carrying that in, everyone has different experiences with grief. And so you may go into it, feeling one way, and another person may be at a different stage of their grief. And then those two stages don't align. If I'm in my denial stage and you're in the anger stage, that looks different.
It does. It does. And I think we should discuss that a little bit, that from a psychological standpoint, we classify grief in a few different stages, and these stages have been well documented. There's no correct pathway. We put them in order, but some people may skip scenarios and they may revert back to another one.
Timeline
and there is no
them.
timeline. And so we start in that denial phase. After denial, often go into that anger phase of, I'm just mad at the world. I'm mad that this happened. I'm mad at whoever did it. I'm mad that they left me, whatever it may be. And then we get into that bargaining phase. And this one is the one, even from a clinician standpoint, I don't see a ton, but you can recognize bits and pieces of it. I see it more in my patients that are dealing with, for example, a new chronic disease. So now they're grieving the life that they thought they would have. So now they're bargaining. Well, if I did da 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 da, or if I do this and this, I can change it. And now we're trying to talk to them, what is a realistic expectation? But after we get through that, now we're starting to get into, okay, I'm acknowledging that this is happening, and this depression may kick in a little bit more because I can't change it.
Right.
And then that last phase is acceptance. And I would love to get all of my patients there.
Yeah.
I would love to get myself there a lot quicker.
Say, what are the statistics on how many people actually reach acceptance in a grieving state?
I don't know that number, but I can't imagine it being high, or even if it is high at certain levels, it would be based on time.
Yes.
So those that are, 1 to 2 months into it, year to 3 years, 3 years plus, I think it takes a lot longer to get to acceptance. I don't even know if I'm fully to acceptance on any of mine, but there are times, but it's because it is not a linear pathway.
Right.
We often we'll go back to previous stages.
Absolutely. And I can attest to that. After I lost my dad, it was very much a denial state. Like, even though that person is no longer, for a long time after that, just in my mind, he was just still living in Minnesota.
Sure.
And I just hadn't seen him in a really long time. Yeah, because that's how I was able to try to cope with some of that. I was 16 years old and like, I didn't know how to deal with that. And then what happened almost simultaneously, really, is I became very angry with God. And so, like, I never believed in God at that time, but that loss of my dad really solidified my atheist viewpoints for most of my, the time after until, I got sober and found God. But that denial and anger kind of happened at the same time. And I was, rolling around with these feelings and also attempting to just numb it out and going through, different holiday gatherings with my grandmother, my dad's mom, who was still alive, and her grief process of losing her son at, he had just turned 40. And so she would bring it up a lot and be very emotional about this. And that's how she was processing. And I was more internal and shut down, and I didn't want to talk about it. And so are there situations that you have experienced that, or from a, more clinical setting, like how do you deal with those discrepancies in the grief process?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I'll share a personal example of dealing with it even just this summer. So my grandmother grew up in a large family, and the family, not everybody was close, but closer with, she was the only sister, so it was all brothers. So the dynamic's a little bit different. She had a brother who lived very close by, my Uncle Art. So in case there's family listening, FYI, this may be a trigger for you, but who had really struggled this last summer. And I had helped as much as I could with my great aunt trying to find placement. He had Parkinson's. He was going through a lot of health issues towards the end. And I remember, and so not to share a lot about the family situation, but I remember being present with him, my aunt sitting next to me, and just ugly crying because here he looked exactly like my grandmother in her final stages. And so trying to explain that hurt that was there and having to excuse myself because I knew that pathway, I'm still healing and my healing's taking a long time. And some of that stems from a childhood of unsettled problems and being able to address those. And so me personally, I needed to separate myself. And do I regret doing it? I do. I wish I could have been there for the family more. I did what I could from the background and being a medical provider, giving direction and recommendations. But the hard part was knowing that pending funeral.
Yeah.
So now he passed and preparations were being made, and then the announcement of when the celebration would occur. I had to work, and that was an excuse, right? I did work and I was at work, but it was something that I looked at. Oh, nope, I have to work.
Yeah.
It was my excuse to get out of this situation. I know I was not ready in my journey to be present there. I wish I could have been there for family members. And what I tell people, and it took me some, reflecting on that myself, that it's okay because I'm healing. It's okay to support them. It's okay to step away.
Yeah.
I was not in the place that I would have benefited anybody by being present. And so helping clients acknowledge the level or where they are in that situation or what may be a trigger for them and how do you cope with it. If I had somebody who was dealing with a family member who is going through grief so deeply that it impacted all other relationships that that
Yeah.
person had. And now you are, maybe it's a daughter, maybe it's a son, maybe it's a sister. How do you support them, but
Right.
still protect yourself?
Right.
It's okay to have those boundaries, to
Mhm.
check in on them, make sure they're doing well. But what are you doing to fill your cup?
Right.
Because I can only help those if my cup has enough water to sustain me.
Absolutely.
And that has been the hardest part as a clinician.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how much empathy I have for patients that come in, and I have seen colleagues that have become so hardened
Yeah.
that they are in that burnout phase.
Yeah.
And it being a good 9 years into practice, I see why. It's just we
Yeah.
carry so much and then we
Mhm.
compartmentalize it. And that is my issue as an individual, is I compartmentalize
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
so now with my uncle's passing, I compartmentalize all of the situation of my grandmother's passing, and then immediately back in that situation, everything's to the surface.
Sure.
And not healthy, right? But it's one of those mechanisms that we have for coping.
Yeah.
For you personally, what has been some tools that have helped you with coping with grief, relationship, loss of a loved one?
For me, I think it's when there is a safe place to talk about it.
Yeah.
It took me a good 5 years after my dad passed to go to his grave for the first
Sure.
time. I just wasn't able to go. And, once I did start going, I had to prepare myself every time because I knew it was going to be this very heavy emotional experience, that I would cry and I would feel, and all these memories and all of these things would come up. And so I would choose a time that I knew I had time to go through that process and allow myself to be in that process of feeling the things. And then sometimes I would reach out to someone and talk about it afterwards. Sometimes I would journal about it. Sometimes I was okay just going and sitting there, being with my dad essentially, and then moving on. And there is no right or wrong way,
No,
right?
no.
And so for me, it's really been just the acknowledgement, more like the allowing myself to feel the things and making it known to myself that it's okay to feel those things. When I was drinking, I would cope by drinking. And when those hard feelings would start to come around the holidays, knowing, oh, my dad's not here, yada, yada, I would drink more. And then that would be an excuse. Well, I feel bad, so I can do this to myself. Now that, I have been sober for such a long time, I look at it more as like an honoring of my dad to take care of myself better during those times of grief.
To give yourself a pause.
Yeah. And just learning to feel. I mean, most of my life living in survival mode and, like you said, compartmentalizing these different things and, having so much trauma, I was very easily able to dissociate from situations and emotions and just completely check out. And so through various types of healing modalities that I've gone through over the last several years, learning to bring myself back instead of dissociating and feel the things. Just feel them, whatever they are, and know that it's okay.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, that grounding process that we do, whether, like you said, you journal, and I have found a great technique to be even journaling if it's a loss of a loved one, for example, journaling as if you're writing that individual a letter.
Yeah.
You know, what would I say to them if they were here now? What would I explain this situation is like? And that helps because it gets what happens. And I use this example all the time when I'm treating somebody new for anxiety and depression, because they often go hand in hand. We separate them, but they often go hand in hand. Is I explain to them that anxiety, that loop that we get caught in, is a part of our brain that does not make sense. It's irrational. Right. It's irrational thought. So the whole process of why journaling and therapy works is because now I'm writing it or I'm speaking it,
right,
and a different part of my brain is now hearing it. And it's that aha moment of, that makes absolutely no sense.
Well, sometimes it makes sense, but we you're in continue your head with to spiral it. And right?
The connection points, they don't make sense. It's irrational thought. And that's what anxiety is. And so when we journal it, when we speak it, when we see counseling on it, a lot of that is self-healing, right? Yeah. There are different techniques that help guide you there. And I'm not downplaying therapy by any means. I've spent decades in therapy, and I have probably paid for many second boats. I don't know, but it works for a reason. But a lot of it is being aware of that situation, allowing yourself to feel the situation, changing it. How can I honor that relationship?
Absolutely.
How can I honor that loss? Yeah. For me, baking the cookies. Yeah. For my kids, reading the same stories that they would hear at my house versus their mother's house. It's that connective community and that connective growth.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, whether it's, like you said, a loss of a loved one or a loss of relationship, either one can be just as grief stricken as the other.
For sure.
You know, in our brain, it doesn't necessarily differentiate between the two. A loss is a loss, right?
Exactly.
And it's hard. And intentionally making time to participate in self-care, you know, either prior to or after an event, you know, whether it's, you know, Christmas gathering or whatnot, and that person is missing from that chair. What then can I do after going through that experience to make sure that I'm okay?
Right. How do I sustain myself? Yeah. And it, you know, also thinking of it too, one can argue that all grief is a relationship loss.
Yeah.
You know, it's the loss of this loved one and what they meant to me, the loss of this relationship physically. Right. Also adding that there may be a listener out there that has lost a significant loved one that happened to be an animal, right? You know, it's that relationship or that connection that we often are wanting or longing for. Yeah. And we have a hard time envisioning where we're going to be tomorrow, next year, 10 years from now, without that significant piece with us.
Yeah.
And that takes time. That's not something that happens overnight.
Absolutely. It does. And I think, you know, that's going to be ever changing in our lives. And there's no way to know where we're going to be or how we're going to feel tomorrow. I mean, there's no way to know that. And so, you know, implementing self-care into our routines is not selfish. I used to think, you know, I can't go get a pedicure because it's selfish. That's, you know, whatever. I can't go take a walk today instead of doing this other thing. That's selfish, but it's not. It's necessary.
Yeah. How are you filling your cup?
Yeah. Especially in these moments when we know that we are going to go into something that's going to be emotionally triggering for us. And there really isn't a way to avoid it. The holidays,
nor should you.
Right. But I think a lot of people want to avoid it.
I agree.
And the holidays can be especially triggering, you know, surrounding loss of various types of things. And it could even be a shift in a relationship that with someone that is present at the holiday event. And, you know, maybe you had a falling out and you still have to be there with that person. And there's a grief that comes along with, well, our relationship isn't the same anymore. And so how do we navigate that? And, you just do the best that you can
Yeah.
and try to give yourself grace through that. And then, yeah, like we've talked about, implementing certain care aspects afterwards to allow ourselves to fully process through the feelings instead of stuffing them.
Taking the time.
Yeah.
You know, giving yourself the grace. It's easy for us to say, oh, they're going through a loss. You know, let's give them grace.
Yeah.
Give them space so they can feel. But do you do that for yourself?
Right.
You know, that's huge.
Yeah. And I think it's important, kind of like you just touched on, is like the outward people around us that don't know what we're feeling inside, right? And they can't understand what our emotions are.
Right.
And they may perceive us as being cold or distant or rude or, you know, any type of way. And maybe we're just having a really hard time.
Right.
And
it's a lot.
And I think it's just, you know, a pertinent note to say, like, this time of year is hard for people and tensions can be high and relationships can get strained and people are grieving, and just to be as supportive as we can and understanding as we can.
And giving yourself time.
Yeah.
You know, it takes time. We both could say that we have healed in many facets. We have, you know, we wouldn't be doing a podcast with no solutions for you. But even for somebody that's going through it and somebody that is claiming that they have healed from it, there's still that cycle potential of you backtracking and being triggered.
Absolutely.
One example, we had talked about this briefly when we were prepping today's content. I recently shared a very raw video on my social media post about, I was on my way to work and I think it was a commercial that came on, and it was an elderly person. And then the song that came on right after just happened to be a song that my grandparents would listen to. And I'm like, where the heck did this come from? And the waterworks start, you know, and I hadn't even been thinking about anything. And so made this post about grief and how it hits you out of the blue. You're going to go maybe months, maybe even years where you're not acknowledging, like you acknowledge the loss, but you're not back in that
not at the
raw
forefront.
state.
And
then bam, out of nowhere, it's there. And that is grief to the T. You're going to cycle, you're going to go through it, and that is normal.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about how we can change our traditions or adjust them while we're experiencing this.
Sure. And I think first acknowledging that we're going through something and being honest with ourselves that, you know, the tradition's not going to look the same. They don't look the same even if that relationship or that person was still here. It still adapts every year. So we need to give ourselves that grace to acknowledge that change is inevitable, first and foremost. But then how do we honor them while maintaining tradition? So for me, like I was explaining, the baking, you know, I get the kids involved. We do it. It's a fun time. This weekend, we're going to start. I don't even know what my grandma called them. I just call them the Hershey Kiss cookies, but you know, the peanut butter and it has a little Hershey Kiss on top. I let the kids pick out the Hershey Kisses that they wanted. One picked almonds, the other one picked peppermint. I'm like, whatever, let's just have fun with it. So kind of keeping the tradition alive. I'm doing what I would have done with them, but now I'm making it better.
Adapting it to your current life circumstance. And I think that's really important. And, you know, while this isn't necessarily holiday related for me, you know, with the loss of my dad, I, for a long time, didn't do any type of art because my dad was an artist and I got my artistic ability from my dad largely. And, you know, just the last couple of years, really, I was kind of reached this point of recognition that by me not doing art, I'm letting that kind of memory of my dad die, essentially, because that is part of me that, you know, came from him. And is important to keep alive.
Mhm.
And so I think that's beautiful what you said about the cookies and the baking, because it's keeping something
Mhm.
from, your grandmother alive
Mhm.
and creating something new with it to
Mhm.
kind of, not to make it a sad
Right.
mourning type of
Right.
thing, but a joyful
Right.
remembrance.
Exactly. And I give stories of my grandparents, and my oldest met my grandparents, but my youngest never have. So, I mean, and he has some fine memories. I think they remember more of them because of the stories that I talk about them. So even though they're gone, they're still there, right?
Mhm.
It's just that they changed. And
Yeah.
and now we're on a different spiritual mechanism of grieving. And some of us believe in Christian beliefs, some believe in Muslim beliefs, some don't have any traditional sense of religion, but they're very spiritual in nature. I think it's just acknowledging that energy went somewhere, and I'm holding space for it.
Absolutely.
It was here, it's not. What does that look like? How am I honoring it?
Yep. Yeah. And I think there's, so many different ways that we can do that. Like we've kind of mentioned, writing a letter or journaling or, speaking out, talking to someone or talking to that person, in the air, or, if it's someone that's still alive, you can still have conversation with them to yourself and process things verbally, or, creating something new around something old.
Right. It's honoring that tradition.
Yeah. And maybe there is an empty seat at the table this year, and maybe you are feeling really heavy about that and it's weighing on you, and just to know that that is okay, and we get to choose what we do with that. While we can't remove the grief and the heaviness completely, we do get to choose what we do with it.
Right. And our presence matters. You're going through the grieving process. We're supporting others. Many of us have different relationships, right? Our relationship isn't just us and that other thing that we now have lost. That we're multifaceted creatures. So being present, being aware, honoring that. I do want to, as we're wrapping up, add in that there are a number of resources out there for you to reach out to. Church groups, if you belong, grief support, friends. I would be the first to tell you that you could call me, text me, send me an email. I'm happy to sit with you and talk about it too. And I think that's the wonderful thing about most of us, that are in this realm of mental health, if you would even classify it as that we, we are willing to answer questions and help you along your way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if there isn't someone in your life that can hold space for you, there's always someone else maybe that you wouldn't think of necessarily. Like, maybe it is someone on a podcast that you don't know personally, but we would, obviously be happy to do that. And stepping outside of your comfort zone sometimes to find support is necessary.
And grief support is huge in the traditional sense of a community of individuals that are going through similar situations, that you just now have a facet for discussion. Right. You're learning from each other. I can't emphasize enough the importance of support groups or community networks in general, but in this setting, it is a great avenue for healing.
Absolutely. And a friend of mine, Lindsay Bussey, is an author. She wrote a book recently called The Grief Support Book. This book is for not the grieving person, but the people surrounding the grieving person. And so great resource. There's lots and lots of resources for the grieving person as far as books, podcasts, things like that. So she took a different avenue and wrote a support book for the people around the grieving person. And so great resource if you're going into the holidays with someone who is in that stage.
Yeah. And we'll put that information in our description of the podcast. I know she's on Amazon, e-Kindle. I think there's print versions, but I greatly support that as well. It's a great resource and tool. And it's somebody local who has developed something too if you're in the greater Janesville area. But as we're winding down, I thank you, and I thank you for sharing your story and for joining us on our journey today. If you are liking what you're hearing, stay tuned for future podcast episodes and follow us on social media for more.
Absolutely. And just know that you are not alone in this. There's a lot of us in the same situation, and it will be okay.
It will. And have a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Worthy Initiative podcast. If today's conversation spoke to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it.
Follow the Worthy Initiative on our socials and subscribe to our YouTube for more stories, live events, and tools for your healing journey.
Remember, healing isn't a destination, it's a climb.
And every step you take matters. You are worthy. The Worthy Initiative podcast is intended for educational and inspirational purposes only. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by the host and guests are based on personal experiences and professional perspectives and should not be interpreted as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening to this podcast does not create a provider, patient, therapist, or client relationship with any guest or host, including Jim Plasky, APRN. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed mental health professional, or qualified healthcare provider regarding any medical or psychological condition. If you are in crisis or need help immediately, please contact your local emergency services. Call or text 988 in the United States to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, or reach out to a trusted professional or support network in your area. The Worthy Initiative podcast explores sensitive topics related to trauma, healing, and personal development, which may be emotionally triggering for some listeners. We encourage self-care, boundaries, and reaching out for professional support as needed. All content is the intellectual property of the Worthy Initiative and may not be reproduced without written permission.